Take me out to the ball game. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Hat Historian. In this video, I'll be talking about a hat that is the most common and popular hat of our time, the baseball cap. The baseball cap, along with some of its variants, such as the trucker's hat, is by far the most widespread item of headwear in modern times, and indeed the only hat many people nowadays will wear with any kind of regularity. A simple skull cap, with a visor in front, usually composed of 8 triangular pieces of fabric sewn together, then topped with a small button, it is universally recognizable. Beyond its original use in the sports of baseball, it has spread to become an item of casual wear, a promotional item for companies, spirit wear for schools and universities, a fashion statement, part of military and police uniforms, utilitarian wear for workers and farmers, political promotion pieces. I could go on and on. Truly, it is today's universal hat. So let's take a look at how it came about. Known as America's national pastime, the sport of baseball is thought to have its origins in the game of rounders, a ball and bat game originating in England. It was brought to the American continent by English immigrants in the late 18th and early 19th century, and gained great popularity in Canada and the United States in the 1830s. With its rules codified by Alexander Cartwright, a member of New York's Knickerbocker Club, it truly established itself in the country in 1846, when the first officially recorded game was played on June 19th between the New York Nine and the Knickerbockers. The Knickerbockers lost. Soon, the game spread far and wide throughout the country, gaining national status by the 1850s. So what does all this have to do with hats, the subject of my channel? Well, as anyone who has seen a baseball game can attest, as opposed to sports like soccer or football, baseball players spend a lot of time standing in place, looking towards the sky in search of a small white ball. The players wanted, therefore, to protect their head from the sun and have a way to shield their eyes while keeping their hands free to catch the ball. Early baseball players often tended to wear straw hats or some form of flat cap, or a kepi-style hat inspired by the US Army's forage cap. Some wore a baggy but rounder version of the newsboy cap, which then evolved into the cricket cap popular in the former British Empire. But there was little uniformity in the early decades of the sport. The baseball cap, a dedicated hat that we might now recognize, was first introduced by the Brooklyn Excelsiors in 1858. Its construction possibly inspired by the newsboy cap I just mentioned, which was also made by sewing triangular sections together and topping them with a button. It is a hat reduced to its most functional parts, with a long visor that could provide the eyes adequate shielding from the sun, and a tight-fitting skull cap that would prevent the high flying off during runs, and not get in the way during throws. Though the ancestor of the modern baseball cap, it still did not resemble it that much, looking a little bit more like a jockey or cycling cap with a small bill, made out of leather stiffened cloth or cloth lined with cardboard. While this Brooklyn-style hat quickly proved popular, standardization was still a long way off, with many teams in the 1880s and 90s favoring a more cylindrical hat known as the pillbox-style hat, which was brought back for a time in the 1970s by the Pittsburgh Pirates. But there was also Chicago-style, Boston-style, college-style hats, and many others, each with their own distinctive look. Eventually, however, the Brooklyn style became dominant, often made of wool. These hats were usually in distinctive colors for the teams, but something that is ubiquitous today was still missing: the team logo. The Detroit Tigers was the first team to add the iconic Gothic D to their hats in 1901. Very soon, most other teams imitated them, either placing their existing logo on their hat or creating one for the purpose. In 1903, the Spalding Company developed what they called the Philadelphia-style hat, which had a bill reinforced and stiffened with stitching, bringing the look closer to what we now know. In the decades that followed, the last holdouts of alternate styles switched to this Brooklyn/Philadelphia style of cap, whose shape slowly evolved. Amongst other things, the visor got longer and more rigid, shielding the eyes even more. The crown also became slightly taller and the front was stiffened, which allowed the team symbol to become more visible. By the late 1930s, the baseball cap had essentially become the item we now know. Its use during all this time, however, was restricted to baseball fields, and it was purely an item of athletic wear. One would no more wear a baseball cap on the street than one would wear basketball shorts to the office today, at least in most offices. Even the attendees of baseball games tended to wear the more formal hats of the time, such as boaters, panamas, and fedoras. This attitude lasted through World War II, though the conflict also saw the creation of the mechanic's cap. An army green version of the baseball cap, it was often worn by the men servicing aircraft used during the war, as it was practical in cramped spaces, and less likely to be blown off by propeller wash on airfields. Many of these mechanics embraced the hat and continued wearing it after the war, though in this case it was solely seen as an item of workwear, akin to a boiler suit. The large upheaval of World War II changed attitudes of young people towards many practices, however, and society's views of the baseball cap were no exception. Very slowly, it began to creep out of the diamond itself. In the early 1950s, fans started to wear copies of their team's hats to games as a show of support, and in that same period, new screen printing techniques allowed companies to cheaply make hats sporting their logo, which they would give away as promotional items. Many agricultural machinery and supply companies did this, which made the baseball cap popular in that field of work. This kind of hat evolved into the famous trucker hat, which I'll talk about more shortly. This popularization of the cap happened at a similar time that, as I've said in other videos, the general wearing of headwear declined amongst Western men in the 1960s. As opposed to all other kinds of traditional hats, this period saw the rise of the baseball cap. No longer wearing fedoras, bowlers, trilbies, and other such hats in this new, less formal age, headwear was now only worn for utilitarian reasons, back to the original purpose of hats, to keep the head warm in cold weather and protected from the sun in warm weather. For the latter, the baseball cap seemed ideally suited. The 1970s and 80s saw an explosion in the casual wearing of baseball caps, encouraged by their cheapness, several fashion publications such as Vogue taking an interest in them, and then its appearance in the media. The famous title character from Magnum P.I., played by Tom Selleck, wore a baseball cap which gave him a smooth, laid-back look. Through these American cultural items, the hat began to be popular in other countries as well that have no tradition of baseball, particularly in Europe. The hat had spread to the military in the Vietnam War, when the Army adopted the cap, field, hot weather in 1962. The Navy also liked the caps, and though for a long time they weren't officially endorsed, many sailors had one which had the name of their ship on it. All the veterans saw their caps as marks of pride, and veterans associations began producing some bearing the name of the conflicts these men served in. As it spread in the 80s, people would wear it in various ways in order to mark themselves out. Well, wearing it backwards had long been done as a practical matter, either to protect the back of the neck or to avoid hitting whatever one was facing with a visor, taking pictures with a camera for example. Some young people began to do it as a fashion statement. In a much more counterintuitive way, others wore it sideways, which served no practical purpose whatsoever, but did create a striking look. As the 1990s came around, it was widely embraced by musicians, particularly in the hip-hop scene, such as with the band NWA. They wore a type of hat that had become widely popular in the 1980s, the snapback, which featured an adjustable strap at the back. Until then, like all hats, baseball caps were fitted, and one had to get them in one size. The snapback allowed a one-size-fits-all hat to be made, making it significantly cheaper. This had already existed to some extent in the promotional caps I talked about. These rappers tended to wear dark caps that represented in some way their hometowns or even neighborhoods. It was also in the 1990s that famous director Spike Lee made a significant contribution to the baseball cap by requesting a custom-colored Yankees cap from the maker New Era. This led manufacturers to make team caps in all manner of colors, rather than the traditional team ones, from camo to pink, and allowed the hat to become a greater item of self-expression and a fashion symbol. Its popularity has hardly waned since. Another slight variation of the baseball cap is the five-panel hat, which is constructed a little differently. It has a large front panel and lacks the button at the summit. It is often used in uniforms, as the large front allows for the insignia to be easily placed on it, and the lack of a button means that it can be worn under helmets. A little bit ago I spoke of one of the most famous variants of the baseball cap, the trucker hat. It is distinctive for having a tall front, usually foam, and a mesh back. The idea was that, for working men, the foam front would help absorb the sweat off the forehead, while the back would provide ventilation, and of course the visor would protect the eyes from the sun. They began to appear in the 1970s as promotional items, often found in truck stops or agricultural co-ops. With their large front, they could bear the logo of a company such as John Deere, or otherwise Harley-Davidson, Budweiser, Coca-Cola, and as many others as one could think of. Because they were often given away, and quite often in rural areas by livestock feed companies, they were originally known as gimme caps or feed caps. As they were given in areas that included a lot of cargo hauling, they were quickly adopted by truckers who, beyond liking the free merchandise, appreciated the ventilated back in their hot truck cabs. From there they got their popular name. While definitely a working-class item originally, with almost redneck connotations, the trucker hat became something of a fashion item amongst 21st century urbanites, with some celebrities even sporting them. Comedian Juna Friedlander has made it one of his trademarks. The baseball cap has come far from its humble origins as an item of sportswear. It can now be found in virtually every country and every walk of life. From the cheap versions worn by truckers and workers, which are sometimes given away for free, to expensive designer versions by makers such as Louis Vuitton, which go for hundreds of dollars, it has also spread to many sports and professions. It is worn by many police forces around the world, seen as more practical and comfortable than the stiff dress caps that came before. While the US Army has gone back to the more martial patrol caps, which tend to resemble kepis or the old pillbox hats, many other armies have adopted the baseball cap as their rest headgear, and the US Navy and Air Force use them, often with the ship's name on the Navy ones. Political campaigns, especially recently, have used baseball caps extensively, with either the candidate's name or their political slogan adorning the front. Other sports, such as basketball or football, give their players hats when they win a championship. Schools and universities have some with their institution's name on them as a spirit item. Reinforced ones, called bump caps, are sometimes worn as head protection when a hard hat isn't necessary, but you still might hit your head. Novelty ones can be ordered with any saying you like on it. Even the President of the United States can now be seen wearing one on occasion, something unthinkable a generation or two ago. Sports, company publicity, uniforms, schools. The baseball cap is by far the most ubiquitous hat of our era, and shows little signs of slowing down. And as opposed to most other hats that I talk about on this channel, almost all of you watching this are likely to have at least one in your possession. So I hope once again that you found this video interesting and will join me again soon for another hat. Until then, I tip my hat to you.